And now we'll be transitioning to the strategic industry academic partnerships. And I think in a way that was very nicely described early on at the beginning of the symposium, at an academic center like Stanford, there's a lot of new technologies that are being created. But to be able to really reach patients at scale, I think it's really important to be able to work with industry partners so that we can scale these broadly. And here at the AIMI Center, we're delighted to have a lot of very close industry affiliates that we work with. And I'd like to invite them to the stage. Please, Anja Brau, Enhao Gong, Nish Khandwala, Vidur Mahajan, Tanveer Syeda-Mahmood, and Truong. Thank you. Thank you all for being here. Maybe as a way to get started, maybe we could start off with a quick introduction and maybe with a rapid fire question too. As affiliate industry partners with Stanford, what is it that you look for in academic collaborations? So maybe we can just go down the line, quick introduction and a quick response to that question.
Okay, so my name is Truong. I'm the CEO of VinBrain, and we honor to be the partnership with Stanford AIMI. I think what we're looking for is a lot of core technology research. And fundamentally is unique with AIMI is about having the doctor and the AI sit together in the room. So with the industry partner, we're able to take the outcome of this into making the impact into real life. Thank you.
Tanveer?
Oh, I think I didn't get the mic.
Oh, maybe if we can, pass some mic.
Sorry.
Perfect, thank you.
Hi, I'm Tanveer Syeda-Mahmood. I'm from IBM Research, actually in the Bay Area. I already work with AIMI folks and been here. And I'm an IBM fellow, a global imaging AI leader. And we help start the field of AI in radiology and getting them closer to adoption and so on. What I'm looking for in, IBM Research is a research facility. And we look for doing strong research collaborations that end up in good quality journal publications and get the work accepted in both academia and in rolling out into clinical workflows. So hopefully having an academic partner that also has a hospital association helps in that direction.
Thank you.
You can keep that.
Oh, I can keep that?
Vidur?
Hey guys, I'm Vidur Mahajan, CEO of CARPL.ai, my first ever industry panel, so very excited. We essentially build tools for validation, deployment, and monitoring of medical imaging AI solutions in clinical practice. Honored to be part of the affiliate program here at AIMI. This is probably the world's leader in AI deployment and validation, which is essentially what we do. So we could not be doing this without support from AIMI. So super excited about seeing where this goes. And we just started this week, so very excited.
Thank you. Nish?
Hi, everyone. My name is Nish. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Bunkerhill Health. We are a consortium of academic medical centers for AI research. So instead of spending months, if not years, getting data sharing agreements, research agreements, IRB approval, technical infrastructure all set up, researchers in our consortium can work across institutions to validate and train their algorithms using existing frameworks that we already have, both from a legal as well as a technical standpoint. We then take those algorithms that come out of this collaborations and then commercialize them, all the while sharing revenue back with the researchers. To your question, Akshay, about what we are looking for in collaborations, Stanford is an academic medical center. We are a consortium of academic medical centers, and so we are here to offer Stanford researchers the ability to train and validate their algorithms across multiple institutions.
Thank you. Enhao?
Hi everyone, I'm Enhao Gong, founder and CEO at Sato Medical. Sato is also a team from Stanford. Around end of 2017, early 2018, we licensed our own invention at Stanford out to commercializing our AI technology. We really focus on using AI to provide a new approach to improve image acquisition, make imaging faster, safer, and better. And so far, we have obtained 4 FDA clearance and deployed more than 300 sites globally. And I think that has been really sit on top of the foundation we did at Stanford. And we're really honored to continue the collaboration with AIMI and Stanford Radiology in general. I think what we're really looking for, and we continue to work together with Stanford side, is on both the development phase and the evaluation phase. On development phase is from academic side more 0 to 1, but we really need to make the product to be more generalizable for all kinds of scanners, different modalities. So that's what the industry and academic centers will be really helpful. And last but not least, on the validation side, I think there are a lot of validation research we have been collaborating with AIMI to publish paper in a fair way, in a very unbiased way, making sure AI can really improve the outcome, can really improve the quality. So I think there are a lot of collaboration that will be very valuable. Thank you.
Thanks, Enhao. Anja?
Hi, my name is Anja Brau. I'm from GE Healthcare. We are a global manufacturer of medical equipment and pharmaceutical diagnostics. On the medical equipment side, that includes multimodality medical imaging and critical monitoring solutions. And in particular at Stanford, we have quite a rich history of collaborating in the medical imaging space, especially in MR and CT, and have brought over a dozen products to market through our collaboration with Stanford, which we're very proud of. And that's actually the key goal of our collaboration, to your question, Akshay, and also why we partnered with the AIMI Center and expanded our collaboration into AI a few years ago. The goal of collaboration with academia, from my standpoint, is translation. So development and translation of new innovative methods that impact care. And so when we partner together with academics, we are then, as an industry sponsor or supporter, we are now a stakeholder in seeing that this gets tested and developed in a way that can scale. And the first goal is to establish that the method works at your site. I mean, much like AI, but I'm even speaking more broadly, works in your setting and solves an important clinical problem that you have identified, and we sort of agree that this could be applicable to other sites, and then try to scale beyond. And when we reach that point, then we know we have a successful product that we can take to market and then impact global patient care.
Thanks, Anja. And I think you bring up a really important term here, which is of translation of technologies. And maybe one question that comes to my mind is, are there successful pathways or mechanisms that you've seen that have worked well for translation? And maybe I'll pose this question to Anja and Tanveer, just because there's been a longer relationship with with Stanford. But then I'd love to get a smaller startup perspective too about how one can actually achieve that translation. So what do we have to do to translate better?
So the first step to translate is to make sure it's robust and works well, not 50% of the time, but 100 or 99.9% of the time. And that's where we need the clinical, the churn of clinical patients and the volume that Stanford has access to really, really test and put it through all the pressure points. And when that fails, then we need to work iteratively with partners and improve upon that. So the milestone of a clinical adoption at one site is absolutely important and critical to taking it beyond and scaling. Often techniques will fail before we can expand beyond, but I can't stress enough that if you're going to make a product out of something, it has to work extremely reliably and extremely robustly, not only for clinical acceptance, but also to prove to the regulators that this is going to be safe and effective too.
And maybe, Tanveer, translation might look different for a company like IBM than it might look for a company like GE. How is it that you think about successful translation of your ideas into products that you're interested in?
Yeah, I think the direction is a little bit reversed in our case, since we are looking into algorithm development and research in there. So to us, the value of the partnership is in grounding it in real problems and real data and capturing the input of clinicians as to what will work, what will not work, and obviously the access to data and working on real data is important as well. So the output from this could be strong machine learning, new approaches to solving some domain-specific problems, which might in turn help in developing more robust products in future. But it could also be learning what works in clinical practice and going the other way and helping its adoption in clinical workflow. So it works both ways.
And then I'd be curious, going with Vidur, Nish, and Enhao in that order, how does that process look like for a company that's maybe in a younger stage or just starting up? Are there specific challenges that you think you encounter, or how is it that you try to think about this translational gap and trying to overcome that?
No, for sure. So part of what we do at CARPL is accelerate the adoption of AI itself as an ecosystem. So we are essentially a validation and distribution platform for AI. So we bring AI algorithms onto our platform, allow hospitals, imaging centers to test out these algorithms, figure out clinical nuance and clinical insight, and then subsequently do the whole dirty work of risk packs integration and stuff like that. Now, what we need for that are clinical proof points and economic proof points, right? So, and both of those proof points, when you take like an ecosystem lens, right? Not an app-based lens or like not a chest CT lung cancer kind of approach, but a AI as a whole approach. I think that kind of bandwidth is only available at institutions like this, right? So that's what we are looking at getting out of it. Like, how can we as an ecosystem come up with clinical first evaluation metrics and then proof points, and then move from that to economic evaluation metrics and proof points. So, and then of course comes the whole, the holy grail of what button does a doctor press or maybe not press in order to see outputs and results and all that. So, which is something that is interesting.
Maybe Nish and then Enhao next.
Yeah, I think as we think of translation of these AI tools into clinical practice, the further we get along the process, the tool becomes less known as an AI and more known as an intervention. It's just like any other medical intervention, whether that's a medical device or a drug for that matter. You have to prove what clinical utility and what financial utility, to Vidur's point, what does it offer to the stakeholders? So from a clinical perspective, does it maintain or improve the current standard of care? From a financial perspective, for the three biggest sort of financial stakeholders in the healthcare ecosystem, pharma, providers, and payers, how does it impact their top line and bottom line? Does it help them get more patients? Does it help them reduce their costs? And so as we think of translation, what does it mean for institutions to start adopting these tools in practice? You have to give them a reason to do so. And it's not going to be because it's AI. It's not going to be because you have this fancy deep learning model. It's going to be because of some kind of utility that it offers that solves a real problem for them. And so for me, translation is simply changing the focus from AI as being AI and more as an intervention.
Thank you. Enhao?
Yeah, I think Sato for sure is also an example of how we translate from technology like Stanford to a viable product used in clinics. I think as a Prince mentioned, there also in the industry academic partnership, there are twofold. One is on the development side. So at Stanford, I think our majority data we validate on is GE data, because Stanford has a lot of collaboration with GE. All the system is GE, and we, as a software, we need to make sure it's really generalizable. So on the development phase, after translate from the IP side to company, we also developed a lot to validate. We really work on all kinds of scanners, all kinds of populations. So I think that's like extension to what we are doing at academic sites. But also on the stability and generalizability, not only limit to the factor of the deep learning model, but because there's a lot of engineering piece, IT piece, and even human factor when we deploy at a site like Stanford or outside. Like we learn more about how this system will be used, how the technologies, how the radiologists, on the operator side, you need to use it. There are small features sometimes I must have, like to avoid any delay of the workflow, making sure it's seamlessly integrated into all kinds of PAC system scanners. So I think that part is something we won't really care too much at a academic side. We really validate it, publish it, but when we really translate to a product, also even get FDA clearance, we need to consider some other new ones as well. And also for validating, there are continued validations on clinical efficacies. We work with Stanford Center and other institutions to making sure it's a multi-center study to show it's really working and publish paper around it. But also, as Vidur said, the economic side as well, that's translate to a product. So you need to making sure it's not only something better to have, but the radiologist and operator and technologists will value it and they eventually pay for it, or there's a like economic values that help everyone, both providers and patient side, eventually save the money for entire like a healthcare expansion. So I think that's very important for this kind of translation. Thank you.
And then Stephen, I'd be interested to get your perspective on this, just because maybe VinBrain doesn't follow the typical niche of a company. You have your own imaging center and you're treating patients and you're trying to improve the algorithms that are being used. What does translation mean to you? Do you want an algorithm that's generalizable? Or do you just say, hey, I want an algorithm that works for my patients and that's good enough? So how does one balance those?
Yeah, thanks. So I believe that generalization brings efficiency while you do the development of AI model. However, when you bring it to practice, I think that anything have to be tuning and also threshold adjustment for specific case. I'm taking example like the machine coming could be from GE or could be from Philips or could be from Fujifilm. So you have to do some kind of like preprocessor, to make sure that the data coming is follow certain standard, and so that you can achieve the best possible outcome. At the same time, when using it, like especially in VinBrain, we deploy to 100 hospital, and we have data even like generalized from US, from Europe, and from Asia. We still believe that the generalization serving certain great thing. However, the specification is become very important when you're tuning for a particular area. So to be successfully to bring from the research to the reality of deployment and get acceptance for doctor, you need to basically have a period of fine-tuning when you deploy it. And the important thing that most people heard is also the feedback loop. You have to build into the system to make sure that not only the model, but also have to have a pipeline and the feedback loop so you can get the doctor feedback and the specification will fit into that feedback loop to optimum. Thank you.
And at this point, we're halfway through the panel session, so I'd like to invite any questions that the audience may have. We have mics on either end, and I see Kurt got up very excitedly, so I'm excited to hear his question.
Yes, I wanted to, I'll just shout. I wanted to follow up on Anja's comments as well as the previous panel where we were talking about this gap in translation and make a comment that maybe would take the wind out of our sails a little bit. Do we need, to Yin's experience where we had a model that was available but wasn't deployed, perhaps that's because each site where that model would have to be deployed, the on switch, it's a high-tech thing. Each model that would have to be deployed would require some local validation and potentially fine-tuning at that local site. So NYU, Stanford, Harvard, all these places, we know how to do that. But even us, we think about that's a high cost, right? So what about all the other sites that don't have that knowledge, don't have that technology? And so is there a role, first of all, there may be a need for a vast infrastructure of monitoring, of retraining, of fine-tuning across all of medicine that isn't there today. That's kind of the wind out of our sails comment. Number two is, but isn't that a role for industry to help us supply that? So that's for the panel.
That's a tough question. I'm glad I'm not on the panel.
I can take a shot at it. Kurt, thanks for the question. I think that's like the most shameless plug for CARPL that I can make. So that's what I think. What is needed is going to be a parallel tech stack within hospitals. If we're truly going to be able to deploy AI the way we all envision it, right? If we look at the niche of radiology, most applications today in isolation will maybe make us more efficient by some percentage points. But how do you get exponential benefit? So certainly a parallel technology stack, certainly hyper-localized validation. So not even to site, we are trying to come up with insights that say that there is a 35-year-old Indian guy with a BMI of whatever, 27, in the ICU with a chest tube, what is the best AI algorithm out of the whole multitude of AIs that are there that should run on this scan. And by the way, it's a GE CR system from 20 years ago, right? So that's the technology stack that, and training is not part of this, right? It's all inferencing and all smartly picking out which AI runs on which patient, not even site. So so that's what we're trying to build, and it's difficult because IT systems at hospitals are not the most amenable to new things. But then once we have those economic proof points, right? Once you take a radiologist from 100 scans a day to 500 scans a day, people are going to be running out. And the analogy I use is the world of hematology and lab medicine, where you have one pathologist signing out maybe 5,000 tests a day, only looking at 50 slides that need to be looked at, and the rest are auto-signed out, right? So how do we get radiology to that? And that required a lot of push from Siemens and Roche and Abbott and all of these companies to put like these massive factories in hospitals, essentially, where like 5 people are processing out now thousands of samples. So that's what's going to happen, or should happen, in radiology and medicine in general, which is this parallel kind of tech stack, hopefully.
I actually have a counterpoint to that, to make the conversation a little bit more interesting. Let's say you're taking an algorithm as a product and trying to get a community hospital or a hospital that's not Stanford, NYU, Harvard, what have you, to use it. Tools can get you so far. You still need to design a study, annotate data, and the risk that we run into here is that a poorly designed study is probably as bad as not doing a study at all. And so personally, I think that AI would have really failed to deliver on its promise if it requires hyper, local validation of some kind, where every site that you need to go to, you basically need to repeat the same study that you had to do in order to get FDA clearance, for instance. There's just not enough bandwidth, and frankly, if people did have that much bandwidth, you probably didn't need AI to boost your productivity to begin with. And so in the world that I hope that we exist in is where you have to only train your algorithm on a subset of the hospitals, and then the rest, it generalizes, both from an algorithm's perspective, performance perspective, as well as from a utility perspective. And I see that being a continuous process. I'm not saying you test it on 5 hospitals and then call it a day. I'm saying that you probably start with 5 hospitals, but when you go to the 6th one, try to see if that 6th one matches to the 5 hospitals that you previously trained or validated your algorithm to. Not just in terms of data, but also in terms of what the physicians there are like, what processes do they follow, things like that. And if the 6th hospital does look similar, then you do continuously monitor, but you can go in with more confidence than say how it would have been if you had just started building the algorithm to begin with.
I see Steven itching for a response.
Yes. So I think the question is challenging. The challenging in the sense of radiology is a half view. I mean, like a lot of people spend time to study this, and you have a lot of like company develop a machine for radiologists to use, but it still have the error rates reported like up to 30%. So it's a lot of it to do is first, I think the problem that Kerr mentioned is probably could be solved by a combination of more standardization. Standardization interpreted, medical image from Europe and US, that's one. And then second is, I believe, the big data. I think the beginning when you do with, when you tuning your model, you may develop, like say VinBrain developed 1.4 million image. But when we go from 10 hospital, when we go to the next 10, we still have to tuning it. And then when we go to the 90 to the 100, we still tuning it, but we do less. So I believe that the trend of big data and also centralized in terms of standardization of interpreted, combined with, the cloud, computing power when you centralize the data, so that is continuously and iteratively tuning that's probably in a solution to get into, like, eventually you will be less, customization for each of the hospital. So summarize, standardization of interpreters so that, like, doctor get a consensus in interpreted things so that you can reduce the error rate from, doctor to doctor and image to image. And second is big data that help to, to bring, like, more generalization. And then last but not least is about, like, you continue to get the feedback loop. Like, say in our company, after we do the radiology, we realize that, well, besides the radiology is interpreted, we also need all the information. That's what we get into multiple modalities and multiple models technology, where we combine not only, like, radiology imaging, but we also need text extraction. And then now we're working with AIMI, her on the V2 version of, RAD and things like that. I think, like, the combination of multiple medical data is crucial for getting the outcome better for patients and building, like, the feedback loop. So that's why we launching the telehealth so that we can managing the health record into a central places. So we hope with the, the AI model for radiology combined with the closed feedback loop, or, the feedback loop at the scale of telehealth will help us to get the eventually tuning and iteratively make the model more generalization. So thank you.
I'll add one more point, which is, Kurt, it's a difficult question you raised, but one point I want to echo is about standardization. And what is the reason why things are so variable from site to site? And one reason is different equipment, different amount of training, different quality of the input images. So that's where we've seen a big opportunity, and as you know, through our work with you at AIMI, is to pull AI into the imaging process itself to make sure that the quality of images coming out, at least from GE scanners, is the highest quality it can be and less operator dependent, less training dependent. Even from the order coming in, being the correct order, to how the patient was scanned and detecting things like image artifacts, optimizing dose, and making sure that everything coming out of the system is the highest quality it can be, and then feeding into the downstream AI algorithms.
Maybe, Anja, I have a follow-up on that. And maybe it's a controversial statement, but is standardization a fleeting goal? Because what is higher quality today may not be higher quality tomorrow. So if we go back to Stephen's point about aggregating large data sets, well, if the nature of my data is constantly, hopefully, getting better over time, how does that impact some of these downstream applications that we're developing? And I'd love to hear your perspective and then maybe Enhao's perspective, because the premise of both of these companies is to improve how we deliver and build these images.
That's right. The target is always...
It's moving,
is
right?
moving.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, how do you train to a moving target? And the other point is, how do you enforce standardization? At the vendor level, we can do certain things. At the kind of clinical guideline level, that can also help standardize, but that also trails usually by a few years. So now it seems like the pace of technology innovation is outpacing the guidelines. So I'm open to suggestions. I think it's a difficult problem.
Yeah. I feel it's also complementary, right, from the scanner side and also the software side, because I think the hardware product cycle in a way is limited by more factor, and software we can also catch up more and to fill in the gaps. In a way, the quality become more and more standardized. And I think also we see the adoption in the last maybe 1 year or few months is, I think, gets smoother and smoother, even though we find there may be tuning, but I think there are several factors. First is if it's a hospital system customer, the line expansion makes the adoption easier. They already deploy several sites. They know how to do it. They know how to evaluate, so they can deploy more. And even for new customers, they can see the data from database for specific scanners, specific type of patient, and specific body part. So I think all this kind of data aggregation and also maybe with the data aggregation will improve new models. So I think this continued improvement is advantage of AI in general than conventional algorithm.
Maybe I can take a complementary point of view from all the comments that have been made so far, and that is coming from research R&D side and the technology side. So what we've seen, the development in machine learning models and frameworks is lagging behind what is there in software development in general. So if you think of how databases are deployed in hospitals, they would go empty, and then you would populate them, and then you would use them. So there is a rollout period over which you would allow it to populate. Now with machine learning, if you could do something similar where it is seamless integration with the systems and gotten the data so that it can do as if it's a pre-trained model and you are training along, then this would be different. Now, of course, there are two difficulties associated with it. One is the technological development of the models itself, so they are adaptable to self-realization and training, which is a problem that AI researchers are actually working on to look at different architectures that allow for interpersing deep learning workflows with this type of intelligence in explainable AIs. But then on the other side is the regulatory aspect, where the regulatory bodies will allow such type of customizations to be done on site for every model as well. So I think there is a technology solution that can be worked out. The harder problem may be getting the regulatory people to agree to that. Yeah. So this might be a local on-prem. People have gone through cloud centralized solutions, but now coming back to hybrid models, and with the hybrid cloud type of setting, you might be able to achieve this.
Maybe we'll get to some audience questions too.
Hi, Sharif Tarman. I'm span a lot of different things, so industry, clinical, academic. I guess I'll start with a disclaimer. I think partnerships are really, really important, but I'm going to ask a hard question, which is, how do we address sort of malaligned incentives and or barriers to things like data sharing and making sure that there's alignment in incentives, right? Because again, in my sort of wearing my industry hat, I kind of want to hoard data, right? I want to keep it. I don't want other competitors to grab it, right? Because that prevents them from, that's right, that's a barrier to entry. But where I'm wearing my clinician hat, I'm like, well, I want to share it, but we also run into sort of institutional challenges, right? So even though I'm at a children's hospital and a university, because those two are actually separate institutions, right? Sometimes we even run into just sharing data between our sister institution, right? So how do you kind of think about maybe addressing some of those data sharing barriers? Is there really anonymization of data? I mean, if we've seen sort of what we thought was anonymized data, I'm like, oh, I can actually reconstruct this MRI and I can see the face of that patient. And is that technically anonymized? Because it's not really, it's PHI, right? So I think there's a lot of barriers. So I'd love to kind of hear the panel's thoughts about when we create these industry academic, industry institution partnerships, how do we kind of start to overcome some of those barriers, but also thinking about the data sharing aspects and that sort of urge or desire to sort of hoard the data and not share it?
Yeah, tough questions keep coming.
Yeah. So I think the world is getting into open source, and I think open source is happening into the software industry. So I think the next is the data industry. So I think that one of the things I think like maybe like you cannot share the whole set of the training data in the industry, but I think like say validation set and things like that. I think that AIMI is put forward and other institutes put forward can be shareable, so at least you can achieve certain standardization and generalization. And then, of course, like your technique and your agility, your pipeline when you build the feedback loop will have to differentiate. I think the world is getting more and more sharing, and I think it's flat and it's getting broad. So I think that's eventually, I think that is the differentiation will be shifted and the bar getting go to higher. So I think that's like at the VinBrain, I mean, like we sharing the data in publication, we sharing large sets of data for the COVID, like 10,000 data set. So I think that's we need to promote that to really making the world a better place. So, thank you.
I can just add 2 sentences or maybe a couple of sentences. This whole perverse incentive around data sharing, like we saw how it worked during COVID as well, right? VinBrain was just one of the groups that shared data, but there was hardly any data out there on COVID, which was shocking because during the initial days of the pandemic, March, April, May 2020, and I come from India, and we didn't have our first wave till about September, October, but there was no way for us to get access to like 5,000 CT scans to visually learn, let alone AI and all that, right? There was just, people weren't sharing their data. And I, in fact, at that time, we all had a lot of time. We started like this whole data aggregation platform in India with Indian hospitals. And I think, everyone fell into the same trap that, if you're an academic hospital, what better opportunity do you have to publish like the highest cited COVID paper if you're the place that has the most COVID cases? So you'd rather wait for it to be accepted to a Nature or a Lancet and then open source it, if at all you can, than open source that data. So that was, this perverse incentive thing. I don't think it's just an industry thing. It's a people thing. It exists, and there are ways around it. There are billion-dollar companies that exist in this country that are built on the backing of just getting data from one hospital and sharing it with industry, like companies like Seox, Datavant, Truveta. Truveta is a company. Bunch of health systems come together, say, hey, why do we sell to the middleman? Let's sell directly. So these are all very much out there, right? And these are very much happening. So I think you put a dollar value that is high enough, hospital security systems open up, everything, IRBs disappear, all sorts of stuff happens. But I don't know if I should be saying this. But it's true. You can just Google, I want to buy data, and like you will start getting cold calls. So,
none of these answers are endorsed, by the way. Maybe on that note, we'll try to finish with one question from Yin. So please go ahead, Yin.
So I have a question about, what am I going to be paying for in 10 years, right? So, if you're a GE or Siemens, right, like you're going to just you could tack these on, right, as part of your services, right? Am I paying for platforms, right? Am I paying for the models, right, which we haven't demonstrated that they're protectable, right, in the same way a drug product's protectable? So I'd love to hear a little bit about, in 10 years, if I'm a health system, like what am I paying for? Right? Am I paying 6 figures for one model, or am I actually just paying a general for bunches of models?
Paying for value, in my opinion, it has to be valuable. I don't want to hog the conversation.
Any takers?
Yeah. I think, as Vidur mentioned, paying for value, I think there are a lot of economic studies we are working on the entire academic side and industry working on to show the really concrete value. But I feel eventually it's an end-to-end solution. You pay for the solution, you pay for the outcome, like it improves certain efficiency, certain capacity, and that can easily calculate it based on like how much it valued, right? As if you upgrade the system, as if you purchase a new scanner, as if you kind of hiring more people, right? So I think all this is estimatable, and I assume eventually is eventually not necessarily whether it's AI or not. It's just a whole solution. AI just make it more generalizable and better compared with a non-AI solution. That's what I feel.
I can give an analogy to think through it. Again, we should look at the world of pathology and lab medicine more closely, right? There are purchase departments at hospitals across the world that simply specialize in like sodium, potassium chloride pricing, right? So you'll speak to like an Abbott, Roche, Siemens, or a new path company that's coming around and just try to optimize cost for each of the 1,500 parameters that might be getting processed at a pathology lab. So that is what it's going to be. You're going to be paying for SKUs. You'll be paying for like a chest X-ray auto report or a mammogram BIRADS 1 classifier or something like that. Like essentially, if you were to take like a radiology textbook and go through the contents page, each of them would probably be a line item on an invoice that would be raised, every month, and based on the number of diagnoses that were found or cases that were processed, that bill would be generated. And we've seen in India people paying for AI-generated normal reports and not paying for AI-generated abnormal reports, because normal you can kind of get through and there is value associated with an AI-generated normal report. But not with an abnormal, because my radiologist still needs to look at that. So that's the level at which business model is evolving. And but in the end, you'll be paying for something that helps you and not something that's fancy or cool.
Any final?
Yeah, 10 years down the line, I think AI will be invisible it will be so ingrained. If it worked, it would be so ingrained in part of solutions that you couldn't separately monetize it. It would have to be part of the overall infrastructure. It might creep into the infrastructure itself, and back-end storage systems, cloud setups. So it comes as a built-in service, similar to how AI is being used in commercial world. In your advertising or whatever, you'll see that sort of integrated. So I think the value proposition for then the industry people would be in those services that they're providing or the systems that they are offering, and this would be a built-in future. And if you didn't have it, you would probably not differentiate yourself well. But that would be what I see as that would be a success story actually for healthcare if that happened.
Yeah, so just
quick thought. Yes.
Quick thought.
So we can get
I think that really is get down to you pay for service. You pay for high quality service in the sense of today I got a lot of questions say will AI take advantage and build up and then replace doctor and particularly say question into radiologists. A lot of questions like that when I participate in panel. So my answer is basically when you're getting a better healthcare outcome and patient outcome, the next thing is people live longer. So when people live longer, they have more problem. And then the problem keep continue and the doctor becomes smarter and then AI become a tool to solve repeatable, action of the human, but they cannot replace empathy and things like that. So I think that the value of a doctor exists, and us is about really human need service, human need contact. So I think AI will help to drive efficiencies, and I believe that's what it has for the service.
Wonderful. Well, let's give all our panelists a big round of applause.